Welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It. Today, we're going to be talking about how your emotions and the emotions of your spouse are destroying your marriage. This is a hot topic, and the Bible addresses it with, "In your anger, do not sin." I think I've spent probably half of my week already talking to couples who cannot control their emotions and they just shoot each other. It's just awful stuff that's happening. And so, what we want to do today is talk to you if you're in that space where you get, I don't know, overwhelmed and then blow up now and again. If you're saying stuff you regret, or maybe you're hearing stuff that shouldn't be said to you, then this topic is for you. If you do not get control of this, understand it will just continue to escalate. And then one day, somebody's going to have had enough, and the doorbell will ring, and there'll be a deputy standing there with divorce papers. We see this all the time. And I'm telling you, it does not have to be that way. So I'm with our very favorite licensed professional counselor, Kyle Hargrove. And he's my favorite Texan at the moment, also. So we'll be giving you his contact info today as well. But we want to talk about this. Kyle, this whole thing, it looks like anger, but it really isn't. What are the things that people need to understand around this whole issue of emotionality in marriage?
I think, and thank you. You're one of the only Ohioans that I know, so that puts you very close to the top of the list as well. So, but thanks for the opportunity to be with you again. And I do believe that we are having a crisis of emotion when it comes to working out things during chaotic times in a marriage, because let's be honest with the chaos is when we find conflict. In the midst of chaos, conflict arises. It's
Mhm.
almost inevitable. And once that happens, it seems that we have found ourselves in a place where we're not terribly aware of what our emotions even are. And that I'm going to go as far as saying that women have taken a step, they've slid just a little bit closer to what it looks like to be a man emotionally.
Okay, yeah,
And
fair.
that
Yep.
is that whatever we are feeling comes out as anger.
Oh, man, I hate that, but it's so true. Yes. And I think you're nailing, like, point one would be awareness
Yeah,
around
absolutely.
this. Yeah. So I hate that this has happened. Like, it didn't used to be a thing, but we see this in corporate America too. The women just losing it. And it's so unprofessional. And when that happens in a relationship, it's completely destructive. And it doesn't matter which side of the fence it's on. But it used to just be the dudes that are doing that. But
Yes.
yeah, it's women
Yeah.
full on anger. So what do we need to do in that space? Like, what's going on there?
Well, we've got to learn to become emotionally self-aware. And that's a term that's thrown around a lot. And people say, "Oh, okay, I'll do that. I'll become more aware of my emotions." And so what they end up determining, if they even take it any further than that, is they're more aware of when they're angry
Hmm.
and how often they're angry and at whom they're angry. And they think they know why they're angry, but if they haven't done the work to identify their emotions truly, then they're probably off target and off base with that as well. So when we find ourselves in that position, it's not us that's dealing with our anger, it's our anger that's dealing with us.
Ouch. Yeah.
And when the emotion takes over rather than the rational person, then we lose all the choices. And we've talked about this innumerable times
Hmm.
about it's good to choose when you share your feelings, where you share your feelings, how you share your feelings, and with whom or on whom,
Hmm.
as the case may be. Because when it's anger, it's more of an on whom than a with whom.
Right.
And so often, you know, it just happens in it, the when, the where, the how, and the who are completely determined by the emotion rather than by the rational person. And those choices typically end up creating more chaos and more conflict and more problems than we had to begin with.
So one of the things that a lot of ladies say to me is, I'm just so reactive. And I'm like, yeah, so I want to call that out. You're offended. That reactivity is offense. And yeah, it might be rooted in some kind of hurt because anger is a secondary emotion. There's something under that, but you don't even know what that is. And that's what you're talking about when you're saying this awareness thing. So what do we need to become aware of? Like how does somebody grow in that space?
Well, one of the things we do, and I came across this, I believe, as a result of something that you shared with me, and that was to help people understand what some of the potential emotions are that they might be feeling. To we use a list that we picked up off of Dr. Brene Brown's
Mhm.
materials online, and it's a 30 core emotions. 30 what? What? 30? We have potentially 30? That's just the core emotions. And we could argue to add a few or take a few off of that list and kind of refine it a little bit in each of our own ways, but it's a really good starting point for people to look at and say, look at all these words of things that maybe I am or have felt. I am feeling them or I have felt them.
Mhm.
And do I even know what they mean? And if so, or if I don't, then I need to look those up. And this is what I do with my clients all the time is I share this list with them. And most of the time, they're fairly familiar with all 30 items on there. So if there's 30 items that are emotions, are emotionally driven, and we can say, yeah, I'm pretty familiar with all of those, then why don't we identify those emotions when it's them that we're feeling?
Mhm.
And I think it's because we're lazy. I think it's because we want this stuff to take care of itself, and we don't
Yeah.
want to get involved in the conflict and the emotion that comes along with the confrontations. And so we don't do anything. And when that happens, I think the emotions are just going to come through a path of least resistance. And anger is one of the easiest ones. It has lots of different faces and it has lots of different places. And it's one of the easiest ones. And also the other part of that is, I would encourage people to talk about when they're feeling an emotion and it comes out as anger. When you think about it, does that emotion represent something that you're fearful of? Because if it's
Mm.
truly anger, then the undergirding foundation of that emotion, anger, is always fear. Anger is that secondary emotion, and it is the child, it is the byproduct of fear.
Mm. Wow. That's so true. Yeah, even like if we're feeling demeaned or disrespected, that's fear-based, isn't it? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Almost
that's really
always.
interesting. That's really cool. And you deal with people that hate the way that they react, don't want to do that, and yet won't do the work around this because, and a lot of it's men that don't want to do the work, but we're seeing more men take this brave, bold step, and thank
We
God for
are.
that. I love that. And so talk about that. What do you see happening with men and why are they moving towards dealing with this?
Well, I think one of the automatic negative thoughts that people have had coming out of COVID is that everything that is the result of COVID is bad.
Mm.
And that's not true. Because one of the things that has come out of the COVID era is that men have taken to coming to therapy or doing therapy, whether it's showing up face to face or whether it's doing it online in
Mhm.
a virtual setting. Men are coming out of the woodwork to do therapy. And I think a lot of the things that got stirred up while they were sitting at home with their families
Yeah,
during that
yeah.
year 2020 mostly, I think it caused them to become aware of some things going on their inside that they weren't comfortable with. And whether they could identify it or not, they knew it wasn't something that they wanted to carry around with them or to exhibit to others.
Mhm.
And so we've had a lot of identification of anxiety and depression and some of the things that go along like that in men over the last 2 or 3 years that has my practice, for instance, I can't say that I ever had more than 20% of my practice being individual men at one time ever in 30 plus years. And right now, my practice is well over 60, pushing 70% individual men. And I
Wow.
don't, I don't push for that.
Wow. Well, thank
It's
God for that.
the way that it's coming out.
So I want to mention this. You're in Texas, so you're licensed to practice in Texas. And I just want to let people know if you want to reach out, if you're in Texas and you want to reach out to Kyle for therapy, you can do that at headway.co, headway.co. And it's Kyle with a K, Kyle, Hargrove, Hargrove. So we recommend him. And if you're in Texas, that's definitely a great option. I also want to steer you over to the Greater Impact website, greaterimpact.org. You can grab a little PDF on this stuff, 5 tools to stop walking on eggshells, because a lot of times it's that reactivity we know is within us. So we just stuff it. And when we're not dealing with our emotions. So love this topic today, Kyle. Now you had 2 other things around emotionality and how it's just destroying our marriages today. What's another one?
I did. It's interesting. We have seen a shift in our culture toward things that are more natural. We want free range eggs and chickens and beef and all the things that we eat. Um, some people are even raising free range children, unfortunately. I would say, how's
Hmm.
that working for you?
Yeah.
But one of the things I think that we want to make sure does not just happen organically, but that we give some thought to is when our emotions come out and they're unfiltered. And when I say unfiltered, I'm not saying pretend it's another emotion. I'm not saying don't feel it as intensely as you feel it. I'm saying take into consideration your audience. Take into consideration who you're sharing it with and how you're sharing it, because they're going to have an intense and sometimes a visceral reaction to your anger.
Mhm.
When someone comes to me and they're out of control, um, it's difficult sometimes for me to keep my own emotions in control. And so I have learned to set a boundary right then and there if it hadn't been set before,
Mhm.
to say, if we're going to have this conversation, we're going to have it in a way that is respectful and we can accomplish something. We're not going to yell and scream. We're not
Mhm.
going to hit anybody. We're not going to throw anything.
Yep.
We're going to talk about the issue as it is and what we can do to make it better, because that's the only reason I'm interested in talking to you about this, is to resolve it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just genius. You still have people coming in your office and, it's biology. There's a company called Heart Math that has measured 4 different emotions that are electromagnetic waves that come out of a person's heart. And actually, it comes out of all animals too. Like, this is one of the reasons that draft horses are amazing with autistic children. They just calm them down like boom, right?
Yes.
But so anger, if we're within 11 feet of each other and I'm angry, I'm contagious. So it's easy on the phone or over Zoom. But when you're in person with somebody, boy, I've stopped a few people and said, okay, we're gonna take a moment and do some deep breathing, because this level of stuff here is not how adults act. And I love you. So this is an opportunity to dial it down, because this is what's ruining your marriage right here. This thing, it needs to go. And I love you, and we're going to unpack it. But you don't do that with me. So you're probably kinder about that. I'm like, time out. Let's breathe. Whew.
I don't know about that. Sometimes you have to be firm in a situation like that, because out of control is out of control. And sometimes when you've done what you know to do to get it back to a place where business can actually be done,
Mhm.
um, you've had to be firm, and you do everything you know to do to get it to without that. But sometimes firmness has to happen.
Well, and I love rocking people's worlds with this, so you got somebody usually, well, used to be the dude, right? I don't know if this will work with women, but one of the pieces of advice I give to women, if they're brave, is if their husband's getting agitated, like in the early stages of this, to walk up, plant a big old kiss on his lips, full on mouth to mouth style, big old wet kiss, and look at him in the eyes, hold his shoulders and say, I love you. and I want to talk about this when we can both be calm. I'm going to go do this for a little bit and I'll come back. And you're smiling, you're sweet. And he's like, okay, he's got to wrestle that inside of him, you know. And for a lot of women, they just won't do that because they're too afraid.
Yes,
But it works.
it absolutely does. And it's a great diversion.
Hmm.
And it actually characterizes one of the rights that I talk about a lot with people when we talk about courageous conversations, aka confrontations. And that is the right to defer.
Mm.
And sometimes that conversation has to be deferred from the get-go,
Yep.
from the starting bell. It has to be deferred because somebody has not done the work to prepare themselves for the conversation.
Yeah, I had somebody that this couple I was working with, it took them 27 deferrals over a weekend to solve one problem. Like it was, but oh my, I was so proud of them. They worked through that. And anytime anybody got a little bit something, they were like, okay, I need to go work on what it is that's going on inside of me, and I'll be back. And they did. They hung in there. And the neat thing is eventually, you do that enough, and boy, is it tedious when you first start doing it, like every day, all day long, and that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
But you do it enough, it's a skill that changes your life. It's a
And
huge
and
deal.
we have a word in Texas. I don't know if you've heard of it or not. It's called stick-to-itiveness. And they had the stick-to-itiveness to stay with it, to stick to it.
Yeah,
They didn't give up. And I really applaud anybody that is going to stay with something that intensely for that small of a time. Actually,
yeah,
27 times in a weekend is a lot of times in a short period of time.
yeah.
So it takes hard work and uh, it takes humility
Hmm.
to walk through an angry conversation with someone whether it's somebody you care about and love or not. And to have that kind of humility shows, I think, a great maturity of an individual, emotionally and otherwise.
Yeah, I think sometimes we give ourselves permission to act ugly because of what the other person did or said. And that is so messed up. That's the way a toddler thinks. He took my ball, you know, like, no, let's grow up. Let's be mature. Because that kind of mentality is just childish. And I sound so rude when I say that, but it's true. And I want to be honest, I've had to go grow up too. Like I didn't know how to do this when I first got married. My poor husband sat through some ugly stuff, and so did I, right? But
I
if
don't
you
think
don't
you're
stick to it, yeah,
I
like
don't
you're
think you're
saying,
rude at all for saying it because let's stop and think about what an outburst really is. An angry outburst from an adult is no different than laying in the kitchen floor, kicking the tile, banging your head on it, and pounding it with your fist and screaming because you didn't get the cookie.
knew you were going to say the cookie. I'm thinking, I want my cookie. That,
Exactly. You
yeah,
didn't
you're
get the
3 years
cookie.
old.
And so,
Yes,
what most people do in these unfiltered, unidentified outbursts of anger is the adult version of that 2 year old
yes,
temper tantrum.
yes, yes,
So, yes, it does look childish because it
it
is.
is. We haven't grown up out of that in that
And
space. Like we can be mature in a lot of places, but in this space, there's some wounding that's got you acting like a little kid.
yes, and just what you said was inappropriate and hurtful. Well, I was angry. Okay, and what you said was inappropriate and hurtful. Yes, you were
Yeah,
angry, but even when we're angry,
yeah,
we just need to get to the place where we can stop and take a breath and say, this way is not going to fix anything. If anything, it causes more problems than we had to begin with.
yeah. Well, and I think the Lord is wise. I mean, duh. But to say, to say, in your anger, do not sin.
Uh,
So he's not saying don't ever be angry. Like we're going to be angry, and we're going to be angry a lot until we're not. And the not becomes a thing after we work through why am I angry? Like what is this in me? Like you said this thing and it hurt me that much. And the reality is that if you have somebody who's emotionally mature, and somebody says something mean and nasty to them, they don't take it personally. It doesn't offend them. Like, and I am that person now in a lot of spaces where I didn't used to be. Um, it's possible. It's like being bulletproof to the words, and you can see people and have compassion. You can ask a question like, what's going on with you? It's not like you to be harsh. What's this really about? And and then you have connection and intimacy. And I think so many people are missing out on that because they just aren't grown up.
Well, and that's the person you learn to trust. And when someone can look at you and look through you
Mm,
and not take everything that's being said and thrown at them personally,
right.
but look through you and say there's more to this than meets the eye.
Hmm.
What's really going on? And they'll take the time and have the patience to do that. You learn to trust that person.
Yeah.
And we talked
Yeah.
about trust last week in our podcast. And you know, the people that don't walk through conflict together, the people that take the slide all the way back down to the bottom and pick up the next piece of chaos so they can have another conflict instead of walking through it together, they don't have trusting relationships.
Yeah.
If anything, their relationships veer to being distrustful.
Yep. Well, and the thing is, this is so worth the work within us every time we're even just a tiny bit irritated. Um, we have a new puppy and she's 11 weeks old and she's a puppy. And then I have another puppy who's 16 months old and they're golden retrievers. So that we're gonna be doing this for like 3 years. It's just the way they are. I love them, but wow, it's like having a newborn almost. Just the intention and interruption and all the stuff. And I found myself yesterday when I took her out for the 400th time in 3 days or whatever it was. That's probably an exaggeration. But I found myself a little bit annoyed with her because she'd rather chase the leaves than go potty because I'm cold and I don't want to be doing this. And instead of being mean to my dog, and because it's not her fault, I was like, ooh, I haven't felt irritated in a long time. What is that? What is that? What's going on with me right now? Oh, I'm having a little pity party because I'm taking care of the dog so much. Well, Nina, you did commit to this. You did say you were going to do this. Your husband is away working all day. Do you need an expectation adjustment? So, I'm conversing with the Holy Spirit in the middle of that. And I'm like, yeah. And you know what? At the same time, it's annoying to be interrupted 400 times when you're trying to write a new book. And this is how it's going to be. Like, this is reality right now. So I have this whole dialogue. I normalized all of it, and none of that came out on the dog. And she enjoyed the extra time while I'm thinking and talking to the Lord. She's out there and she's got chasing leaves. Um, and then finally did her business, and I came in. But I was just so grateful. Like, even in the smallest moment of that, I was like, thank you, Father, that you father me in that. Because if we don't do it at that level with the tiniest of emotions, if we wait for the big eruptions to interact with our feelings, we're not learning, we're not growing. Like, we need to be so self-aware. Back to your first point one,
Mhm.
is have that awareness of what emotion is this. And it's big training that we don't get as kids. So thanks for putting up with my pottying dog story, I guess.
I love dog stories. They're the best.
They are. So we've
Well,
talked about, oh, you were going to add something. Go ahead.
I was just going to add a third point,
Yes.
you know, going beyond the unidentified and the unfiltered, and that's the illogical. How are emotions destroying our relationships? Because we do not confront our issues and our problems with logic-based behavior.
Mm, yeah.
Now, we're created by God as thinking and feeling creatures. We can think, we can feel logic and emotion. The problem is, even though we've got those two things intertwined inside of us, there are times when we need to be able to pull them apart and compartmentalize them,
Yeah.
put one away for a minute, because the way we solve a problem is through logic.
Hmm.
through rationality. If we approach our problems full on emotion, usually anger,
Yeah.
then again, we're not at our best. We're not speaking truth. We're speaking what we feel in the moment. We're willing to embellish. We're willing to go into the past. We're willing to break all the rules
Yeah.
of an appropriate, courageous conversation because we're angry. And in our minds, it's justified because I'm
Hmm.
angry,
Yep.
regardless of all the damage I'm doing and all the things I'm tearing down and all the things we may have built up before. I can it can take us months to build something up. I can tear it down in a matter of minutes
Oh, yes.
with my anger
Hmm.
or even with frustration. So this is the time when it's imperative, and this is where deferrals in the midst of a confrontation, or even like we said before it begins, are critical rules. I
Yes.
mean, imperatives to be able to defer so that emotion can be set down, set aside, set apart, not thrown away, not walked on, not expected to be forgotten, but simply and gently set to the side while we pull out our logic and say, let's look at the facts. Let's keep things in perspective because emotion actually in that situation becomes the natural enemy of logic. Even though we're this,
Yeah.
they don't work well together in an emotional confrontation.
So this is one of the things that I admire about men because you're able to do that because of how your brains are structured much more easily than women are. Yeah, I use the example of a warehouse for a man's brain. You've got one, you're walking in this thing. There's shelves of everything, boxes everywhere. You pull out one box, you got that box open, it's on the floor, you're in it. That's what we're talking about, right? The logic of this thing, we're working through the problem now. You've put your emotions about this thing in a box and stuck it up on a shelf over there in aisle 8, and that's where it is, and you're not, it doesn't bother you. It's not with this thing. Women are different. Our brains have more connections between the right and left, right? So we've got logic and emotion all wrapped up one together. And so I've got 28 tabs open on my laptop all the time. And there's 50, my warehouse is a hot mess. Like I got 28 boxes all open at the same time. And that makes sense to me and it works for me because I'm a female and there's tons of data around this. And that's why with girls, and I appreciate the men that will put up with the women, because it's girls moving into being women. Because if we don't do this, we cannot do what you just suggested. Because you're 100% right. To solve problems, we have to have the logic piece going. Women can't get to that until we've processed our emotion. It's that stupid YouTube video. It's not about the nail. You remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That thing. Um, and for people that don't remember it, it's just this woman, and people make fun of her, but it's dramatized for sure. But she's got a nail in her head, and her husband's just trying to solve the problem, which is one of the things that men are great at. But she wants to talk about how it feels and how it
Mm-hmm.
snags her sweaters, and she is. I will tell you that she will not be able to move forward in solving that problem until she's had her emotions identified and validated. And most men are like that too. When they're stuck in anger, you know, when they're flooded or emotional at that, they need to have that sorted and looked at and validated and experienced and honored. That it makes getting to the logic so much faster. And with our couple that took 27 times, it's like, oh, just one more thing kept coming up for each of them. It's like, oh, I need to go
I just wonder
process
about
this.
that. Was it one more thing or was it the same thing 27 times?
So
I
it was
don't
the same problem that could not get solved because there was a lot of layers wrapped up in, I think they were trying to find a date that they could go do a thing. I think that's all it was. But there were 400, well, 26 things that were 20, whatever, wrapped up in that. Then they had to take breaks, defer to work, and they did. They hung in there and did that. And I've talked to a lot of people. That's how it works is you stop the conversation. And I've done that. Um, I have a rule, a boundary that I set for all my class members. I mean, they can do whatever they want, they're grown-ups, but we strongly recommend that you have zero conversations when you're emotional. And emotional is even just a little bit irritated or annoyed or sad
Yes.
or ouch, just a tiny bit, like get to that. But most people don't even know they're feeling anything until they're ready to explode.
Mhm.
Ah, that's crazy.
I don't, you talk about the organization and the ability, with all the aisles and this. I can't even find aisle 8 in my workshop. So I hope that it's not expected that we're always going to be that organized with our thoughts, with our feelings, or anything else for that matter. Because oh my goodness, it's such a mess.
Well, everybody's got different giftings for sure. But when it comes to, being able to be logical, men are differently brained than women are in that space. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that because we see connections relationally that you guys might not right away.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So our three things for our listeners today, can you give us a recap of those? What do you want us to
Absolutely.
do? Yeah, be
Uh,
aware of.
we're destroying our marriages with emotion when our emotions are unidentified, when they come through unfiltered, and when they're illogical, which they almost always are.
Mm, awesome.
So that's a lot to work on. It's a
Hmm.
lot to take in, and usually requires the unlearning. It's one of my favorite words. The unlearning of some really bad habits when it comes to dealing with conflict, and the learning of some new ones that are not natural.
Right.
We have to be very intentional to begin laying these habits in that space, one easily at a time. Very gently, very easily try it out, see that it works, then start thinking about what else needs to be added.
Hmm.
But when we do that, we'll see a transformation, and we see people that are actually willing to have these courageous conversations because they're no longer afraid that the person they're in conflict with is there to hurt them.
Yeah.
They understand, we all understand that we're there in the same place with the same person with the objective to resolve a problem,
Hmm.
not to tear somebody down, not to make me feel better about me so that you have to feel worse about you, not to bring up past grievances or sins against one another, but to say, we're in this, we're here together. What in the world can we be thinking if we actually think that the best way to work through a conflict is through verbal violence or the real thing?
Right.
That just doesn't pass.
Hmm.
So I'd like to leave with an idea, if that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Bring it on.
Put some pop in your relationship with your spouse. Always have pop ready to go.
What
So
are you talking about? Pop.
well, well, now I guess that's a more of a Midwest and Northeast term for a cola, which everything down here is a Coke.
Yep.
But
That's a thing.
anyhow, I'm talking about a pause on purpose.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. In any of these situations, be willing to stop.
Hmm.
Be willing to say, I don't know everything there is to know about handling my emotions or this situation. Let me stop. Let me pause. Let me think. Let me ask for counsel from someone that I trust and admire and
Yeah.
respect.
Yeah.
Let me search the scripture. What are the things I can do when I pop?
That's awesome. That's some
So
serious good advice.
be willing to. You don't have to know how, just be willing to. A lot of it'll come naturally. And I think God will see that effort as an opportunity to bless you with something that you
Mm.
didn't see coming.
Hmm. No, that's beautiful and true. So he loves it when we're trying, when we're seeking and knocking and asking. Absolutely. Well, and you can listen to more episodes here today. and learn more about how to deal with conflict in your challenging relationships. Or you can watch the next episode if you're on YouTube seeing this. Yeah, just subscribe, hit that little subscribe button, and watch the next video. It'll teach you something about dealing with conflict and difficult people. Have a great day.